Welcome to the Arcology, a Shadowcasters Network show about all things Shadowrun. I'm Mr. Johnson, and today we'll be talking about Fragging Unicorns' newest RPG, Subversion. Now for the news. Let's start with some Shadowrun news. We had a few recent releases. Astral Ways came out. It is the most comprehensive book on the metaplanes published so far. Pretty cool. I got to write for it, a number of chapters. So we'll be talking about that in a future episode. Also, 2 new card decks were released, one for programs. I'll read this from the website. Deckers rely on their wits and skills, but a screaming fast machine with choice programs loaded doesn't hurt. The program deck has info on more than 40 different programs for Deckers, including basic programs, hacking programs, and comlink apps, providing key reference details for the Decker on the go. The other card deck is a card deck of stat blocks and NPC details. It's called Rogue's Lineup. This deck collects a bunch of Shadowrun characters with compact stat blocks that can be used by players and game masters alike. Need to use a quick pre-generated character when you play. Need an NPC to throw in any situation. This deck has options with the necessary information in easy-to-access form. And lastly, in Shadowrun releases, a new novella from Dylan Bertolo, Shadowrun Corporate Business, is now available. Other news is all about games that are either going to Kickstarter or are on Kickstarter now. I'll mention Exit Vector, which is coming up soon. Pretty cool. It's an aerial combat board game set in a dystopian near future where nations, criminal syndicates, and powerful corporations compete for power in a high-tech world. Players assume the role of an expert pilot for hire, flying their high-performance aircraft on jobs ranging from search and destroy to troop transport. And that will be coming to Kickstarter on March 28th. The Vault RPG hit their funding goal. Yay, and first 2 stretch goals. There's only 5 days to go, and their 3rd stretch goal, an editable resource pack, is within reach. If you're interested in this game or finding out about it, well, that was the topic of the most recent previous Arcology Live episode, where we had members of Team Rex Games on to talk about their game. And we also recorded an audio actual play one-shot of Vault, which was GM'd by Richard of Team Rex Games. And you can find that on the Arcology podcast feed. Podcast. And last, I want to mention Hell Slayers. It's a new RPG, a hack and slash of Morkborg inspired by classic computer games such as Doom and System Shock. It's coming soon. It's a game of my design. We'll be doing an actual play that will be going live next month in April. And the Kickstarter page is going to be going up soon, so keep an eye out for posts about that, and please follow when it does. And let's move on then to our main topic, Subversion. And for that, I'd like to bring in a friend of mine who you definitely will recognize if you're at all a fan of Shadowrun or you've been on the Shadowcasters network before. Actually, has his show release opposite mine every other Saturday. So welcome to the Arcology, Opti.
Thank you. It's great to be back. This is like, what, 5, 6, 7, 4, something. I've been here before.
It's been a few times. First time on the live show, I think. So,
yes, absolutely. I'm glad to be here.
Thanks
physically.
for coming in on your off Saturday.
Yeah, of course. And I'm not in my Opti garb. I've left my bowler hat and rogue outfit behind, and now I'm just slumming it in my pajamas, I guess.
Well, that's the benefit of being a pirate radio broadcaster. So
I do what I want.
Yeah. Yeah. So welcome. We're here to talk about Subversion, which is the big sort of flagship RPG from Fragging Unicorns Games in the same setting as your first game that you came out with Fragging Unicorns, which was Gangs of the Undercity.
Mm-hmm.
And the Kickstarter is live. It started Tuesday, February 21st. We now have the magic numbers of 3234, which means that's how many minutes and seconds it took to hit the initial funding goal.
32 minutes, 34 seconds, and we were funded. Yep. That was a magic moment.
It was. And yeah, it didn't take too much longer to hit 200%. I think it's almost exactly 4 hours.
4 hours
later.
And 32 minutes. Yeah.
currently sitting at 440% of its initial goal. However, that's only 44% of the way to the top stretch goal. So
Yeah.
really hoping to see it keep going up. It was kind of neat seeing it featured in a Forbes article. That's not something I was expecting.
Yeah, that's not something that happens to me every day either. Right. That's definitely not expecting that. And we got to share sort of the headline time with Shadowrun and Vault, and that was kind of fun because they mentioned two of the books of Shadowrun that I particularly worked on that I like a lot. And of course, Vault has become good friends of ours in the time since their Kickstarter launched and ours have launched. And that was nice. And then of course, the headline, the picture for the headline was a Subversion headline. So it was, I don't know, it was a big confidence boost, getting notice of Forbes. So that was fun.
Yeah, they've been making the rounds on various streams and other channels as well. So it's good to see. Been working on this for years. Yeah,
this was I mean, we could talk about like the history of it, the oral history of Subversion, but
it has been years. Let's maybe start with that. Yeah, why not? I don't have it in my show notes here, but we don't have to go on script.
So Subversion was the very first thing. Well, I guess what would become Subversion was the very first thing that Fragging Unicorns started working on, and this was a long time ago. Like the origins of this happened way back in 2017, I think, on a road trip with Rusty Zimmerman, where we were just discussing what kind of RPG we would make if we were going to make an RPG. And so some of the mechanics and some of the things have carried over since that, but almost everything else has changed. But back when we started thinking about doing our own RPG, the very first thing that happened was the dice mechanic. And then pretty soon after that, we started making a space fantasy game. Garde-Manger, some of you are familiar with, and I had sort of worked on lore for a space fantasy game. And then we decided, with Gangs of the Undercity coming out, we sort of switched gears and started working that way instead. And since Gangs of the Undercity was going to be in Neo-Babylon, we decided that Subversion would be a good follow-up to that. And so it's been in the works, in one way or the other for about 5 years, but really probably more intensely in the last 3 years.
So yeah, what is the heart and soul then of Subversion? I think I might describe it as a hopeful cyberpunk fantasy, the game that's focused on building up community and direct action. Yeah.
One of there's a YouTube channel out right now that is doing an actual play of Subversion. Clockwork Tuba is the YouTube you want to look for, but he described it as cyberpunk in the daytime, or cyberpunk with all the colors. Right? So, and I think that's pretty good. We might eventually end up dropping the cyberpunk label if that doesn't serve us as well, because if it depends on what people really mean by cyberpunk. But at the heart of it, it's about exploring the same sort of things that cyberpunk does. Runaway technology, right? The ravages of capitalism. The ideas of power, like who has power, who doesn't, and how do they keep it, or what do they do to get it? So we do want to explore those things, and Subversion really does explore those things. But Subversion also says, what are you going to do about it? Right? Like, how are you going to fix it? Like, don't just sit on your hands and accept it. Right? Like, don't just try to survive. Try to fix things. Right? Don't just like let it go. Don't just let it happen. Fight back. And so that's what we're trying to. Like with Misspent Youth, the one that we recently released, that you wrote most of, we're trying to say this isn't just an RPG, right? Like, this is something that you play and get excited about, and then think to yourselves, why can't I do something like this in real life? Like, why can't I push back in real life? Like, or what areas can I do this in my real life? We're not just in this to escape from life. Like, that's not what Fragging Unicorns is about. Like, Fragging Unicorns is about saying, hey, you might need an escape, or hey, maybe you haven't thought about this before, or hey, let's have fun together in a community. But also, right? Here's some different thoughts, right? Here's some ways that you might carry some of this stuff into your real life, because real life is actually more important than games, but games is actually still a part of real life. And so we want to encourage people with new ideas and better ideas to not just sit back and take what life throws at you, but to fight back, to do direct action, to look out for each other using mutual aid. So we absolutely have an agenda with all the games that we make, and it's basically boils down to there's hope, don't give up, fight back.
Awesome. Well, let's talk about the setting a little bit. What makes Subversion unique? It's a ancient Babylonian-inspired cyberpunk fantasy with the idea that the ancient Babylonian Empire didn't fall as it did at least at the same time in our history, and it existed much longer, and it has sort of same importance and impact on history that the Roman Empire does in our world. So instead of sort of the heavy Greco-Roman influence, we have Babylonian influence.
Yeah, so we had a couple of ideas, right? We wanted to say the cyberpunk fantasy genre is one that essentially included one game, right? Shadowrun. And we thought there's and we did a lot of talking about this, a lot of talking. If we go into that genre, is there going to be comparisons? And yes, there absolutely has been comparisons, but we don't just want to copy Shadowrun. This game is not Shadowrun at all. This is a totally different game in all the themes and all the different things. So we didn't want to do anything. We want to take anything from Shadowrun for granted. So we sort of actively pushed back on, those kind of things, not in a negative way, but if Shadowrun's doing this, let's not do that. Let's think of a different way to come at things. So we thought, instead of, a world where magic comes back in, what if we instead say magic has always been around, right? Which is fun. It's a fine thing to think, but then you start asking yourself, if magic has always been around, that changes the world, right? You can't just say, hey, magic's always been around and everything was exactly the same. Nothing changed. So we had to go all the way back to figure out when was the moment that it would have diverged really greatly from our history. And since we decided to call the main city of our new world Neo Babylon for a lot of sort of rebellious reasons, if you listen to reggae or ska, Babylon is the sort of bad guy, the representative of the imperial power, right? And then if you go back, throughout history, Babylon has been a metaphor for whatever empire you're in right now, right? So you fight back against Babylon, etc. So we named our city Neo Babylon, and then we thought, well, why would Neo Babylon in this world be a thing? And so we worked all the way back. We thought, well, what if Babylon itself had this outsized influence? And which is also great because I'm absolutely in love with Mesopotamian history and culture and mythology. So I was like, yes, this is what we're doing. we're going all the way back to the Babylonian Empire and assuming that they were the first ones to get magic that was strong enough and just use it on a larger scale so that they would stick around longer, right? And you're right, in the Western world, in ways that we don't even really realize anymore, the Roman Empire had this huge effect on our culture and the ways that we think and the things that we do. So we thought, what if instead of the Roman culture, what if it was Babylonian culture? So yeah, that's sort of how we skinned things, and then learning to bring all of that forward, trying to walking through the history of the world year by year to say what might have changed or what's the same and how would magic have affected that to get to a point in time that was 2,500 years after the Babylonian Empire fell, and saying, okay, now it's cyberpunk. What does that look like? That has been one of the hardest things that I've ever had to do in RPG design. And I think, Fragging Unicorns sort of is on that trajectory where we choose the hardest thing and we try to do that first. Right. So yeah, that's what we spent most of the first year doing, is just saying okay, what does this world look like? And now we've got documents that are innumerable pages long that will never make it into print, but at least the world is solid.
A fiction anthology that sort of brings it to life with various short stories and vignettes.
Yeah. So Gangs of the Undercity has some of the lore, and Neo Babylon Nights, the fiction anthology that a lot of our friends wrote for, like you and I, Rusty, Vox did the editing for that book. Palmer wrote a thing. Lots of our friends did lots of cool stuff in that book, and lots of newcomers as well. But yeah, you can. Oh, and then there's even, this is so silly, but I love it. There's even a cookbook that's set in the world of Neo Babylon that Garde-Manger wrote up for us, called "Finding Home Beneath the World," and you can find that on Drive-Thru RPG. But it's just little stuff that sort of adds to the lore, makes the world feel very lived in, and I really, really love that about.
Yeah, how
about
many
our
RPG
world.
settings have a cookbook?
I
Not
think
enough.
Probably 3, maybe.
Yeah, not enough.
I know D&D has one. I'm not sure anybody else. I do have an idea for if I get my way, I want to eventually make a Halloweeners cookbook for Shadowrun. But every time I pitched it, it got rejected so far.
Well, with Howlnet maybe coming out, that might give you the opening you need for that.
Absolutely for Howlnet.
If it ever comes around, so
if I assume it's like sort of more or less common knowledge, right?
Yeah,
or like you can
Jason
find
has talked about it publicly, so we can talk about it.
So yeah, one of the things that I think maybe Fragging Unicorns will do. I don't want Fragging Unicorns to just be like a Shadowrun publisher. Like, we're not going to do that, but we might do some silly things. Like, I think a Halloweener source book is something that I've always wanted to write, but I've never it's never happened. So I think that I might just I have it all in my head, so I might just write that and put it out on HoloNets just to see, just to satisfy my own curiosity.
Those of you wondering what we're talking about with HoloNet, Shadowrun's going to be having a sort of third-party market, so anyone can produce Shadowrun content that is sort of not necessarily canon, but you can put it out there and sell it and make money off of it, and Catalyst takes a cut, sort of like a Dungeons & Dragons DM's Guild, I guess.
Mm.
Not quite the open license that I was hoping for, but still pretty cool.
Yeah.
I think all RPGs should have an open license for people to make stuff for it.
Yeah,
but that's just me.
Yeah,
actually, it's not just me. I think other people have that opinion too. But
also have a book that was meant to come out with Better Than Bad. If anybody remembers that 5th edition book, Better Than Bad, it was called Heroes for Hire.
It was pretty good.
Yeah. Better Than Bad? Yeah, I liked it a lot. But yeah, there was a supplemental book that was supposed to go to PDF only called Heroes for Hire, but it didn't get released because 6th edition showed up pretty soon afterwards, and it was all statted for 5th edition, so they decided to shelf it. But I asked Jason, and he said if I had the manuscript, I could put that on HoloNets as well, so that might make it, which is kind of fun.
Cool. I've got some ideas for things too, but I don't want someone else to do them instead, so I'm going to keep them close to the vest for now, and you can find out about them.
I will put out a hit on anybody who does the Halloweener source book.
There will be pumpkin spice and napalm.
Right, it writes itself.
All right, let's move back on topic with the setting of Subversion. Now, it's in our world, but there's a new continent that isn't in our world that sort of showed up fairly recently called Azor.
Yeah.
And that's where the city of Neo Babylon is. And Neo Babylon is sort of a Neo Babylon because there's a city built there that then. Well, why don't you tell the stories?
Yeah, so to answer that one, like the second Babylon, that area of Mesopotamia, right between the Tigris and the Euphrates River. It is a different thing than most mythologies and most cultures that we study, right? Because it's not just one group of people that have a sort of straightforward linear culture. There's lots of different people groups there that sort of rise to power and then get taken over by somebody else. But then that same group sort of comes back and takes over, and then a third party comes in and takes over. So there's like lots of artifacts and lots of mythology and lots of language that, depending on the time you engage with it, can mean different things, right? So that's why it's hard to say if you see a statue, say a statue of a winged bull with the head of a person, right? Like, is that a demon? Is that sort of a creature that you can encounter? Is that a god? And the answer is, depending on the culture that was in power at the time, they translated it or interpreted it different ways. So the answer is yes, and also no. But yeah, the second time the Babylonian Empire came to power is known historically as Neo-Babylon. But you're right, Neo-Babylon does not have a great ring to it. So we called the city Neo-Babylon because back then they didn't refer to themselves as the Neo-Babylonian Empire. So we thought, well, if it's Neo-Babylon, it's not in use in that world, so we can call it Neo-Babylon. But yeah, the idea, the sort of big event in the world is called the Shattering, and the something happened in the lore of the world to cause the entire Fertile Crescent of Earth to sink beneath the waves, and that caused like a huge problem for the Babylonian Empire. That's when the Babylonian Empire fell. And all of the people, the culture, and the mythology of Babylon sort of exploded outward and infected everybody else around it, right? So the world developed for the last 1,000 years without a Babylonian empire, but with Babylonian culture and religion affecting everything around it. And then eventually, when people started taking to the sea, they discovered that there was this entire huge continent that had been previously undiscovered called Azor. And that's where they decided to build this new city of Neo-Babylon to honor the culture and to sort of be a new shining version of that old empire. So yeah, and Babylon, Neo-Babylon's right in the middle of Azor.
So much like Seattle is sort of the standard starting setting for Shadowrun, the city of Neo-Babylon is sort of the main starting setting for Subversion. You could play anywhere in the world. You just have to make up more of the world yourself then.
Yeah, that's true in some ways, right? Like I'll say like Neo-Babylon is more than a starting setting, right? Like you could not play in Seattle, right? Or not deal with Seattle at all in Shadowrun, right? And it would still feel very much like Shadowrun. I think Neo-Babylon takes up more of the setting, right? It chews up more of the screen than Seattle does in Shadowrun. Because Neo-Babylon is not just the starting setting, it's also the reason why most of the bad stuff in the world is happening at this moment where Subversion is set. So you're going to have to deal with Neo-Babylon, even if you aren't in Neo-Babylon, right? Like, so there's other cities that you might be in, like Dakar is a huge city in our setting, but it's also called Little Babylon because it's just a little smaller version of Neo-Babylon. So everything's sort of, the pressure of Neo-Babylon is pushing down on every single part of the globe, with an exception of North Atlantica, which we haven't explored yet. I won't say we haven't explored it, like the people in Neo-Babylon haven't explored it yet. But that's a setting that we're eventually going to get into, and I'm pretty excited about that too, but that's down the road.
Been talking a fair bit about the setting. Let's talk about a bit about the rules. First of all, you've done something sort of interesting with the Kickstarter in that you've made the rules available for people to see and read, and they're nearly complete, but not yet quite complete form.
Yeah, there's some work to be done for sure. There's like some empty spaces that we just need to write more stuff for. But yeah, it wasn't an easy decision. I'll just say that, like to give the rules away for free while we're running a Kickstarter to say help pay for this, right? Like, why buy the cow and you can get the milk for free, right? And the reason is we decided two things. Number one, if somebody reads the rules and doesn't like it, which is what we were afraid of, and they decide not to back the game, while that would hurt, right, and why we might miss out on a little bit of money that way, we decided that we didn't really want people who didn't like the game to be buying the game. We didn't want people who didn't like the game to be part of our community by default because they bought the game or whatever. So it sort of weeds out people who don't like us. Right? If you don't like us and don't want to support us, then don't do that. That felt a little bit more honorable, right, and like maybe more healthy long term. But then also we figured that if we love our game and if we are confident, if we believe in what we've done, then putting it out there for everybody to see is only going to increase our community, increase people's awareness of it, and it's only going to be good for us, right? I understand why somebody like D&D or Shadowrun might not want to just give their stuff away for free because they probably miss out on a lot of money that way, but I don't think that small businesses work this way. I don't think that indie stuff works this way, right? I think the more hype and the more talk you can get about it, the better. And if people want to pirate it, they're going to pirate it anyway. So listen, here, have it. Information wants to be free. And if you love what we do, if you love us as people, if you want like the physical book or whatever, like, then help us get there, right? Help us to make new stuff, because if you love it and if you don't support us, then we're probably not going to be making any more of it. And so we just figured like all of our values led us to say, like, let's give this away for free. And if people love it, then they'll support us. And if they don't like it, then we probably don't want them in the community and giving us money anyway. So yeah, it was a hard decision, right? And we've gotten some feedback that we didn't love. But also, we've gotten some feedback that has been incredible. Lots of people have joined the Discord recently and have just said, hey, do you want some feedback? And we were like, yes, let's create a feedback channel. And people have just been like, not like, hey, this sucks, this is wrong, but like, hey, what about this? Or hey, what about this? Or is this a typo? And like, we've just gotten more feedback in the last week and a half than we could possibly have asked for if we were sort of doing any sort of traditional playtesting playtesting style stuff. So I think it's worked out tremendously in our favor to have the rules up, and we've gotten a lot of really great feedback.
Yeah, I think another thing that makes this exciting as well is that even though the Kickstarter isn't even over yet, you can actually just start playing Subversion now.
Yeah.
There's no need to wait. I mean, there's more cool stuff coming, but you could actually start your own campaign and have fun with it without having to wait.
Yeah, in fact, I just sent out an update, like literally 2 minutes before we went live, and that has a link to an updated version of the rules that we have updated based on the feedback that we got, from this last week and a half. So yeah, it's jamming, and we've already had people who said, "Hey, I'm starting a game this Saturday," and I was like, "This is freaking rad!" I'm so excited.
It's one of those things that sort of takes the excitement out of it for me for Kickstarters. Like a lot of times I'm at a game convention, I'm going around checking out different games that are in booths, and oh, this game seems really cool. Where can I get this? Oh, it's going to Kickstarter later. Like, oh.
Yeah.
Oh, so it's going to be like more than a year from now, and I'll have forgotten about this before I get to play it again. But not so with this.
Yeah,
of course.
Where can I get this? Here's the link. Play it now.
Yeah. So basic dice rolling system. You roll some d6s, maybe add a number to it, but you essentially keep the best 3 dice out of your dice pool.
Yeah, you roll a number of dice equal to your skill in something. Say you want to climb a rock, you would use your physicality skill, and if you have like 5 ranks in physicality, then you would roll 5 dice. But no matter how many dice you roll, you always keep the highest 3, and that's you add those up, and that's your result from your roll. And it's modified easily by your attribute, right? So if you have a 3 in brawn, that would help you climb the rock. So you would roll your dice, keep the highest 3, and then add your brawn 3 on top of that for your total result. And compare that up against the target number, more or less like D&D.
And I kind of like how you've changed things up from the earlier versions of the rules, where if you've got less than 3 ranks in something, you still roll 3 dice, but you essentially limit the maximum of the d6s. So if you only have 2 dice, then any 6s count as 5s. But you still roll 3 dice. If you have only one rank, then any 6s or 5s count as 4s, but you still roll 3 dice.
Yeah, we went back and forth about that a lot. And initially, we did have, as you say, if you only have 1 in a skill, then you're only rolling 1 dice, and that felt roundly unsatisfying. So yeah, now we have something called dulled, which means if you are like 3, a rank 3 in a skill is sort of like the bottom of being competent in that thing, right? So a 1, which is what everybody starts with across the board in every skill, 1 represents you live in the world of Neo-Babylon, and everybody would have a sort of basic understanding or basic ability in these skills. So number 2 means that you have searched the internet a bunch. You've become a sort of small e expert in whatever it is, but you're not good at it. You put some effort into take some classes or whatever. But 3 is the sort of baseline for being decent at something. But if you have a 2 or a 1 in a skill, you can still roll 3 dice. You just get dulled, meaning a dulled 5, which is what you would have if you have a 2 in a skill. Dulled 5 means that none of your dice can be above 5, right? Anything that you roll above 5 gets bumped down to 5. And then a 1 in a skill rank means that you have a dulled 4, which means that any dice you roll, any individual dice gets bumped down to 4. And that keeps, it makes sense to us, and it's kind of a fun mechanic that we use in other places too, dulled. But also, there's the dice system itself, which is what I was searching for when I created the dice system. It gives a really beautiful probability curve, right? So the more dice that you put into something, or the higher rank in something that you go, it's not just that your result isn't getting more, right? Like, so in D&D, you get better at something, your result gets higher, right? So sometimes you're like plus 30 on something or whatever. Like the target numbers within Subversion stay the same, but your ability to consistently do better is better with your skill, right? Which is what you would expect in real life, right? It's not like you're all of a sudden going to be able to punch a house over, right? If you're like a good martial artist, but you should be consistently able to do really, really awesome stuff within the normal realm of what is possible. And if you're really, really good at something, you should fail, especially fail really, really bad, much less of the time. So with this dice system, it really rewards you for sinking dice into the things that you're good at, because you are going to fail less, you're going to succeed more, you're going to succeed better more often, and you're going to critically succeed fairly often, as opposed to 1 in 20 of failing and 1 in 20 of radically succeeding. And yeah, it's created this amazing probability curve, and the dulled, right, like it matches that probability curve when we sort of gamed it out. So I'm really proud of the dice system. It's not as clumsy or random as some other dice systems, but it's a more elegant dice system for a more civilized age.
Nice. Well, as far as the success scales go, there's a basic success where your number is high enough to hit the target number you're going for.
Yeah.
And then if you get 5 or more over, you get what's called a dynamic success, which is an increased effect.
The dynamic success does double progress or double damage. Yep.
And then the critical is when all of the dice you keep are 6s. So does that mean when you're dulled, then you can't get a critical?
I forget. This is the problem when you're developing something. We've gone both ways. I don't remember. Maybe somebody in the chat who's on the dev team can remember, but I think we've said that dulled means you can't crit, but I forget. Oh no! Yes. Okay. Ha! I remembered my own game.
Okay.
So yes, you cannot crit if you are dulled. So if you are dulled 4 or dulled 5 and you roll all 6s on your kept dice, you cannot crit. But we have another system called grit, and you can spend one of your grit to ignore dulled on one of your rolls, and that will allow you to do a crit if that's what you want to do. Spend a crit, ignore the dulled, and that will allow you spend grit to get a crit. Anyway, that rhymes. So yeah, you can do that. I forgot why we did that. I was like, man, that sounds very familiar, but no. Yeah, so no critting if you are dulled, but you can fix that if you want to spend your grit to do that.
And when it comes to the game mechanics, one of the things I know we wanted to do with the system was make it so that combat is still detailed and a fun part of the game if that's what you're rolling, but it's not the default or the focus of the system.
Yeah.
So we've got got some different mechanics in there for different types of situations. And when we go into sort of roll initiative and the action focuses on a very specific scene and what's going on, you're rolling dice and going back and forth and doing initiative and stuff like that. We've got a special thing called cinematics. Do you want to talk a little bit about that?
Yeah, cinematics will feel very familiar. It's not necessarily so much as roll initiative, because you don't actually roll initiative in Subversion. Your initiative is static, which means like if you're on the Justice League, the Flash is always going to go first because he's the Flash, right? Like he's not going to be like, oh shucks, I got a bad start. I guess I'm slower than Batman today. So yeah, we have a static initiative, which is not going to please everybody, but we have to
streamline things, that's for sure.
Yeah, that's it. We didn't want to spend a whole lot of time, doing things that didn't necessarily add to the fun. So we did streamline a bunch. And as you said, combat is not the focus of Subversion, but also there's a reason why combat is a big deal in most RPGs. And that's because combat has the most direct and deadly or immediate consequences, right? Like it's sort of the ultimate thing that you can do to solve problems, right? And that's not putting a value on it. We're actually saying with Subversion, don't do that. But it will get to that sometimes. We're not taking that off the table, especially if rebellion against a worldwide superpower is what you're up against, right? Like you might want to do violence or fight back or whatever. It might cost you something, right? It might even cost you your values, but it's something that will have a drastic effect every single time you do it. So we thought we would honor that. And also just, the weight of role-playing games in our culture means that if you don't have that, it's going to be a problem I
kind of feel like with any RPG that's more or less open-ended in the sense that like you can do all sorts of different things in it. You kind of have to have combat as part of it. If you're going to have a game that has no combat in it, it needs to be sort of a very focused game as far as what it's doing. Like, for example, the game I developed for Zine Quest a couple of years ago, Funny Freakout. The entire purpose of the game is you're putting on a sort of a horror comedy prank show where you're pulling off a prank on someone, and all the mechanics are focused on making that episode and sort of managing the expectations and fooling the person who's the target of the prank. And there's really combat doesn't go within the scope of that. But I think that's really the only way where a role-playing game with zero combat really works, though.
Right.
I may be proven wrong someday. I hope to be, honestly. It would be interesting to see.
Yeah, so like given the chance to say like no combat or whatever, like we decided like maybe go the other way. I think it'd be more satisfying if we sort of made combat fun and had complexity to it, but also made other things, right, have complexity and fun to them, so that combat isn't like the sort of default. But if it happens, it's complex and fun. But also, you could do these other things. So, you could run away from combat, right? And it has rules for that. You can, talk to people in the midst of combat, right? You can change what the cinematics. So cinematics, and this is what I think the best part of cinematics is, it's not just roll initiative to see who can hit each other quickly, right? Cinematics are basically anything that becomes super dramatic and in the moment, right? Anytime, a couple seconds count versus what you're doing over a couple of minutes or days or whatever. But you can talk, right? You can sort of challenge, you can fight, you can run, you can do hacking. Like there's all sorts of things you can do in a cinematic. It's just that sort of time dilated dramatic time where seconds matter, and that's sort of roughly equivalent to what other systems do when they roll initiative. Yeah.
And so
but there's lots of other things possible. Yeah.
Pretty detailed systems that more or less get about as much attention as combat does, such as the social interactions, social encounters, the chases,
sneaking around, breaching,
Yeah, but you can sort of flow from one type of thing into another, so you can use them all sort of even within the same cinematic, but you've got all these different sort of mechanically sort of crunchy, satisfying ways to resolve these, as opposed to, well, you're not in combat, so just roll a skill check and that will resolve it that way. It's more fun and interesting and detailed than that.
Yeah, and as you said, like all of these systems work in tandem with each other. So it's not like we have to do a completely different cinematic if we're doing one of these other type things, right? Like the basic mechanic for progress tracks works across everything, right? Like the base mechanic doesn't change for whatever you're doing. It's just there's certain, options that we give for certain kinds of things. So there's certain options for combat. There's other options for social interactions. There's other options for breaching or for hiding or for running, right? But it's all the same base mechanic, right? So you're not going to have to learn a bunch of sub games or mini games in order to play Subversion. If you've got the main stuff down, it should be very, very easy for a GM to slot basically any other kind of event in on the fly whenever players come up with.
So let's talk a little bit about character creation, advancement, and I guess what the player characters are. I think as a Shadowrun podcaster, I'm going to bring in another Shadowrun comparison. So in Shadowrun, you're Shadowrunners, who are sort of criminals for hire, illicit contractors who do crime for money, more or less. And that's sort of the default of cyberpunk as well, I think, in the cyberpunk genre. But it's not the default for Subversion. It's a little bit, or perhaps a lot different. You can play that way in Subversion if you want to. We're not forcing you to into one thing, but the game as it stands is written for a very different paradigm, I can say, I guess, for the player character default, which is envoys.
Yeah. So, as you said, we in Shadowrun, right? Like mercenaries for whatever, right? You're trying to work usually for corporations of people who don't care about you, for money, so you can get better equipment for yourself, get more powerful. In Subversion, like that's just not the game that we're trying to play at all, right? Like if you are a mercenary, right, you have sort of fundamentally subverted Subversion, which you can totally do. Like, go nuts, play the game you want to play. But what we're trying to do here is say that the default thing that you are is an envoy, which is a representative or an ambassador or a problem solver, somebody who takes direct action on behalf of the community that sent you, right? So everything that you're doing as an envoy is going to be benefiting the same community where you find yourself living, the same people that you interact with, even when you're not doing something on their behalf, right? So they have elected you or appointed you, or somehow you have become an envoy for this community, and then they will tell you what they need, or something will come up and you will have to act on their behalf because you are sort of, that's what you do, right? Everybody else is going about their business. And if the government is not going to take care of things, if the law or the cops are not going to take care of things, if the corporations and the guilds and the organized crime are not going to help your community, who's going to do it? And the answer in Subversion is you are. That's why you exist. Take care of your community in whatever way you feel is necessary. And the benefit to that is not just you getting built up, right? You don't just get bigger cyber arms or bigger guns or bigger magic. You can. Like, that's absolutely a thing that you can do. But even if you do that, you're not doing it just so that you can go back and do better mercenary work and get more money. You are doing that so you can do better for your community. And along those same lines, you can, if you want to, instead of building up your own body or your own, attributes or your own gear, you can start building up your community instead, right? So instead of using your fortune, which would be like karma and Nuyen and Shadowrun, or experience points and money and D&D or whatever, you can take that fortune that you get and you can invest it in your community and get your community to have better assets and help the NPCs in your community like reach higher heights, and maybe even increase the cast of your community, which will have a sort of effect of raising everybody's lifestyle and everybody's ability to do better. So in Subversion, again, we're not taking an individualist focus. We're taking a focus to say, like, what would your community benefit from the most, and that's what you should find yourself doing, right? It's not a dislocated group of people doing a bunch of dislocated things on behalf of somebody you'll never see again, right? The whole shtick of Subversion is community is important, and how do we benefit everybody while we're doing whatever it is we're doing.
Yeah, so with that, when you're starting a new campaign and making characters, instead of starting by making your characters, you start by creating and defining your community.
Right. Yeah. So this is probably one of my favorite parts of Subversion is the session 0, where you also create your community. You create what kind of community it is. Like, are you a neighborhood, which is sort of the default, but also you could be like a nomadic group. You could be a group of wage slaves, right? And you're the person you're pushing back on is your middle manager. You could be like a group of priests in training, right? And you're pushing back against the religion of Neo-Babylon. Like, there's anything, right? So you just decide what your community is, and then go from there. And then you'll decide what your community's background is. You'll decide what your community is default good at. You'll decide who the NPCs are. You'll decide what the assets your community has are, and then the values of your community and the impulses of your community. So the things that your community values by default, right? If you're part of this community, what can you assume that everybody else, also values? And then what happens when the community gets pushed too far and things get so bad? How does the community let off steam? And that's your impulse. And once you've done all of that, creating characters after that and dropping them in, it really does feel like this is a fleshed out group of people, and you feel like you have a good sense of exactly where your character fits in this sort of in the picture, and it actually just really increases the buy-in, like right off the bat. Like, you don't have to say, okay, are we going to meet in a tavern or whatever? Like, exactly where your character fits in this group of people, and we've discovered that people's brains already are saying, oh, I have stories developing, right, about how my character got to where they are, or like, did they come in later, or did they grow up here? Like, the stories write themselves once you know the community, and once you know, like, sort of what your character is. The interplay between those two things just creates story hooks, and we found it to be pretty wonderful.
Yeah, and I think that was one of the first things I wrote for Subversion was sort of the community and some of the downtime stuff. Though it's evolved a lot since I initially wrote that. So,
yeah, that's one of the things you have to keep in mind when you're creating a new system. Is anything that you write, you have to be able to kill your babies. We have, like, everything that we wrote in the initial phase has almost been completely rewritten, and it's just how it goes when you're creating a brand new thing.
Yeah.
But you did write a lot, and it was all good.
Oh, thank you. So yeah, when we get into actual player character generation, then you get a few different choices. One of which is your lineage, which is our term for like a species or meta type. You get to choose whether you're a dwarf or an elf or a human or a goblin or an orc. And we've got a couple of fairly unique types to this setting that aren't as present in other fantasy settings, maybe. And one is the Yetin. Do you want to talk a little bit about those?
So the Yetin are basically big folk. They're Yetis and Sasquatches and ogres and Almaslar and bugbears. And they're the sort of just group of people that are larger than everybody else and generally hairier than everybody else. We like to think of ogres as hairless Yetin. But yeah, they're the big folk, and things aren't necessarily made for them, but also they've been such a big part of the Neo-Babylon lore for the last 100 years in the setting that, like, they're pretty entrenched now in the city and in the ways of life. But yeah, they're pretty cool. We enjoy them. And I'll take this opportunity to say, like, we had some questions on somebody did a YouTube sort of overview of Subversion, and one of the big questions that came up was, why use these traditional fantasy creatures or lineages or races or whatever when you have Neo-Babylon, or you have Babylon and its lore and all this stuff there that you could choose from? And the answer is like twofold. Number one, it's very accessible, right, to people, right? We really tried to sort of lean into an accessible version versus leaning into not quite accessible. Babylonian lore does not sit in the forefront of many people's brains. So if we just started calling things, here's an Edemimu, right? Like, you don't have any idea what an Edemimu is. And no matter how many times I said it, I would have to say it every single time I went anywhere before anybody went like, oh, Edemimu, cool. So we made a decision to say, like, even if Babylon does have, like, for example, there are dwarfs in Babylonian lore. They're called Kurdbu. And so I could have said, here, these are Kubu, and people would still be like, what? So calling it dwarf, right, it's just a cultural touch point. But number two, in the lore, as we've talked about, the entire Fertile Crescent sank underneath the ocean. So a lot of those species are not going to be as important, right? Like, or not going to be as numerous as the other species were. And as Babylon, expanded out and syncretized, of course, those creatures from other people's lore are going to come up more. Once we do the other settings for the other, other places in the world, for example, North Atlantica, we are not going to have those species be as important there. And once we start doing, like what's happening, anyway, I don't want to spoil too much, but those species of Babylon that were important to Babylonian lore, they are there and they will be important to the lore. It's just that in Neo-Babylon, right, like, these are the particular species that people have, or that have become numerous, and there's reasons for that. But I just want to say, because we want people to be accessible, we don't have to explain this every single time. We've got plenty of other things to explain about the lore. We didn't want to do that. But also,
move into. Sorry, go ahead.
Yeah, go ahead. Yeah, we just the Babylonian stuff, the Mesopotamian species and lineages and creatures have not been forgotten. I promise you. They're just not right now, right? They're just not a playable species right now.
And those sort of big unfamiliar words come into play with something like the origins, which is sort of where your character is from.
Right.
Though sort of Babylonian is probably, again, the default. You've got your lineage pick is something where it's I like how it sort of steps away from the sort of bioessentialism of more traditional RPGs, where you've got essentially some characteristics to pick from, but you're not necessarily defined a certain way.
Right. Yeah, so the lineage is, it's not just like you get +2 strength if you're an orc or whatever. There's a bunch of different traits that you could pick from if you're an orc, right? And it's not just one thing that they're good at. But the most, as you say, like, the most difference between different peoples comes from their culture, where their families are from, essentially.
Yeah, and which culture you pick, or origin per se, origin and background. There's sort of two different levers on this. Mm-hmm. Provide you with some different options as well that you get to layer on. And then after you sort of picked that, you choose your cast, which might be different than your community's cast. And which casts you pick, whether you're sort of undercity or lower caste or upper, or you could even start as an elite cast, but you're sacrificing a lot of your character creation and resources to do that.
Yeah.
Then you move on to, just as your community has sort of impulses, which is how it reacts to things when stuff starts not going their way or they start getting overwhelmed. Your character has impulses as well. Mm-hmm. And you also have your ideology and values, which are, in some cases, are going to align with your community. In many ways, probably will, but other ways might end up conflicting, especially as you end up with different situations. And you also have an option to have corrupted values. Do you want to talk about that?
Yeah, so the values that you have allow you to get grit back when your values, when your values create a complication. But also sometimes you'll just have a value that is not helpful, right? Like some people might have a value that says something like, I try to preserve all life, right? Well, what happens when you're in a cruel world and things just haven't gone your way and you no longer have that value? You've given up that value. You've sort of corrupted it, right? So now instead of I value all life, I'll kill somebody who crosses me the first time, right? That's not a helpful value. That's something that's been corrupted, something inside of you that's sort of just gone wrong or whatever. So you have that value and it sort of causes problems for you, but you can overcome it, right? You can say, hey, this is a value that I sort of want to work off. I want to redeem somehow. So there's also a process of redeeming a corrupted value if you sort of wanted to either start off with a corrupted value, or if you've been in a situation where you've said, hey, I really need to win this, or it's in my character's best interest or the community's best interest to win this, but I don't see a way out. You can actually corrupt your value in real time in order to sort of get a boost, do something that your character would never normally do, and then spend all the time dealing with the fallout from that afterwards. And that usually means a corrupted value.
As someone who's written for Misspent Youth, sounds a bit familiar.
Yes. In fact, it's a funny story. That's actually how we got tied up with Misspent Youth in the first place. Is I was doing initial research for Subversion, and this idea of staying true to your values or giving up your values and suffering, sort of moral stress because your values are conflicting. I was like, hey, is there any game out there that sort of wrestles with this idea that sometimes you would want to give up your values, go against what you really believe if it means winning, right? Or is sometimes you would actually think that your values are more important and you would suffer because of it, right? You wouldn't win, you would actually lose. So I wanted to see if there was a game out there like that. And that's how I came across Robert Bull's Misspent Youth. And I immediately started this conversation with him hey, I had been looking for this, for a long time. This is an amazing mechanic. They have a mechanic called selling out, as you know. So I started this friendship with Rob, and we ended up running Misspent Youth on the Shadowcasters network back. In fact, I think you can look in the what do you call it? Playlist? Is that what they're called?
Oh yeah, it's still there in the Shadowcasters Network YouTube channel. So
yeah, so go to the Shadowcasters Network YouTube channel. Look under I think it's called. Are they playlists? I forgot what they're called. I think that
yeah, there is a playlist for Misspent Youth. Yep.
Anyway, you can check it out. We read it. And Rob was in there, and we had a good time, with Rob in there. But then eventually Rob said, I don't want to do RPGs anymore. He got out of the industry, and we reached out and we're like, we would love Misspent Youth. Please don't let this be the end of Misspent Youth. And he's like, hey, do you want to take it over, Fragging Unicorns? And we were like, yes, that would be amazing. So that's how we ended up taking over Misspent Youth. And then we released Fall in Love, Not in Line last year. And, but yeah, the whole relationship between us was because this mechanic of selling out your values or keeping your values, and what does that mean and how you might suffer or how you might win. So yeah, that was definitely influenced by Misspent Youth, but also it was something that I was looking for Subversion even before that. Yeah.
Yeah, it's worth noting that sort of the key mechanic for essentially awarding experience points, which are called something different in Subversion.
Fortune, yeah.
Yep, is sort of based on acting in alignment with your values and acting in alignment with your community's values.
Yeah,
that's what you get rewarded for. Yeah.
So instead of hey, we defeated this monster, or hey, we did this, we successfully accomplished our mission. Subversion doesn't care about those things. Subversion cares: did you remain true to your values, even though it was difficult? So for every value you remain true to at the end of a session, you would get a reward in fortune for that. Yeah.
So once you defined your lineage, your origin, your background, your impulses and values, there's also another step to sort of create some dramatic hooks, which are sort of you as a player sort of setting some goals for your character to sort of communicate to the GM. This is what I want to have happen. This is what I want to have the opportunity to work towards.
Yeah.
And here's a way for you to sort of hook me into the game. And yeah, I like how it sort of helps build up the story before you even start playing.
Then after I think it allows the GM to have some built-in ideas for what your character, automatic buy-in for what your characters might do. So like, in other games you might think, oh yeah, I have a girlfriend or I have a kid, what I mean? But like they never really come up except as like, oh no, the bad guy has kidnapped your, significant other or whatever. Like in Subversion, your relationships with these people like are a big deal, right? Like you create those hooks and you tell the GM ahead of time, here's what I want the arc for my character to be, make it happen whenever it fits or, around it. I think that gives the GM a lot of freedom and a lot of interesting things to play with along the way.
Yeah, and then your next step would be choose relations, which again in the sort of Shadowrun context would be like picking your contacts.
Mm-hmm.
It's a little bit more in depth than contacts. I think you may have people who are creating people who are your character is very close to, or they might just be sort of contacts you can reach out to. But this sort of helps to flesh out your community. But these relations might also be outside of your community, I think.
Yeah. And they all have abilities, right? They all have skills that they're good at and things that they can help with. So it does feel sort of neat when you're able to use them to help. It feels, again, communal, right? Your relationships actually will help, and you're not being penalized for going outside. You don't have to pay them, right? Like they just like you. So yeah, of course they'll help.
You have the option to start out with more character creation and resources, fortune by starting out in debt if you want, but that's an option.
Yep. And even debt is relational. Yeah.
And then after all this, like all the way steps 1 through 9 is sort of defining a lot of the narrative aspects of your character, the story elements, some of it which have to do with the game mechanics, but you don't really get to the crunchy bits of character creation until step 10, which is where you choose your attribute scores, and then 11 where you choose your skills. And then these will sort of define a bunch of secondary attributes like your guard, how hard you are to hit, that sort of thing, your health. You got something called, you've got something called health, which is like a measure of your physical health. Then you've got something with our own made-up word, anonymity, which is a measure of your, how would you put it?
It's an abstraction of mental and emotional health and wellness. One of the things we didn't want to do was make a 1-to-1 correlation between mental health and this mechanical number, right? So it's not, a 1-to-1 correlation. Like it's not like,
so it's not exactly sanity in Call of Cthulhu.
No. That I think that's too blunt, right? For me to be comfortable with.
It's feeling good about yourself and being able to think clearly, I guess. Yeah,
it's more akin. The way I've been thinking about it is like composure, right? Like how good are you in that moment, right? like people go like, hey, how's it going? Like you're like, I'm good, right? Or like, oh man, I'm off today. Like I'm feeling off, and that could be like I'm feeling really off, right, to the point where I can't really continue or function. Or it could be like I'm doing so well that like I can take on the world, right? That's anonymity. And every time something happens to you that is traumatic, or every time something happens that makes you afraid, every time you push yourself past your limits, right? Like those are things that will make your anonymity go down. When somebody like, says like, oh, hey, you're like a really sucky swords fighter, right? Like somebody just like calling you out like that may be an anonymity hit, right? Like it may not ruin your whole day, but it's something that might affect you a little bit. Like, hey, take a point of anonymity damage because that guy that you respect just said you suck at the thing that you're really good at, right? So, anonymity just sort of reflects this sort of additional lever that people can pull when, again, the only thing that you normally would want to do is like, hey, well, I'll swing an axe at it, right? You don't have to swing an axe at it if you can sort of undermine somebody's confidence in themselves, right? Like that's what anonymity does, and it feels a little bit more elegant to have that on a different track than like psychic damage or whatever, like taking your hit points away in the same way that an axe would.
D&D, you've got sort of that bardic ability of essentially insult your opponent, and they have to make a save where they take damage to their hit points.
That felt a little weird to me, like in that, that's an example, right? Like, oh, you take physical damage because of Bard.
It's a spell,
Sure. But like we wanted to actually do that. Like we wanted to take that seriously. Like what if, right, somebody insulting you could put you off? because in real life it does, right? Like I could insult somebody close to me and like throw their whole week off. That's why we are careful with our words, right? In Subversion, we wanted to sort of reflect that in a way. If we're going to be dealing with, things like grit and values and impulses, like we also wanted to sort of bring in all the crunch in our game is about interpersonal relationships and how you are working through your own stuff. So there's a lot of effort that we go into I guess the way to say it is we take very seriously the idea of the way you act, how you act, and what you think and what you feel matters. And we didn't want to, again, be blunt with that. So again, we're not associating mental health or emotional health with enmity directly, but we are saying, what would a system look like that took all of these things seriously? That's what we've sort of come up with.
Yeah, so we mentioned grit a few times. I know if you're familiar with Gangs of the Undercity, it's sort of your a measure of your gang's willingness to stay in the fight, and you can use it to power special abilities. How does grit come into play in Subversion?
Yeah, grit came, even the initial idea of grit from Gangs of the Undercity came about because it's a term that some psychologists use to say, like, there's something in people that allows some people to continue past, where other people would just fall apart, right? Some people have the exact same things happen to them, but sometimes some people just say they have grit, right? They just have that thing that allows them to just keep going, even when they sort of, most people would fall apart. So in Subversion, grit allows you to do just that. You can take an amount of health damage, you can take enmity damage, and you can use your grit to sort of mitigate that to allow you to keep going when most people would fall apart. But you can also use grit to sort of say, okay, universe, you're going to bend to my will. Right? I'm going to make this happen. So you can do a reroll with grit or whatever. You could force an opponent to reroll a die with grit, or you can certain abilities will say spend 1 grit to do this, right? So it essentially pushes you past your limits, physically, mentally, and spiritually, or in terms of magic. It's something that allows you to do above and beyond what normally you might be able to do. And the way you get grit back, as an aside, the way you get grit back is by indulging impulses. Right. So you have these things that are sort of unhealthy coping mechanisms that you have to indulge yourself in. And every time you do, you get 3 grit back. If you do that in a session, right, you can say, hey, I'm going to indulge my impulse in a way that sort of creates problems for your group. Then that's how you get grit. Otherwise, you have to give up one of your downtime actions during the downtime session in order to get that grit back. Yeah. And the GM can spend grit too, in some fun ways, not only to sort of bring some chaos into the community, but in the same way that a player can spend grit, the GM can spend grit, but the GM can also spend grit to force relationships. I don't mean force it like, take away the agency of characters. What I mean is, like, at the end of a scene, the GM can say, hey, I'm going to offer you 3 grit back, or I'm going to give up 3 of my GM grit to say, you have a conversation with your friend about how you feel about what just happened in that scene. And basically you could get grit back just by having a conversation about your feelings with your friends. And I think that's a really fun and subversive way to say having a conversation with your friends about your feelings is super important. And people would say, like, oh, that's abusable. You just do that every time, right? After every scene, you just share your feelings with your friends, and the GM has to either give you grit or give up grit. And the answer is yes, exactly. Please abuse that, because then what do you get? You get an entire group of people around the table that are talking to their friends about their feelings the entire time. That's role-playing gold, right? That's what I want to see, right? And if it means you have a full measure of grit every time in every session, I'm totally cool with that, because the way your characters are acting is, I am talking to my friends about my feelings all the time, which means I am a healthier person. And I fully endorse that. So abuse it in that way. I think it's going to be gold. Yeah.
Yeah, so I guess that makes sense for us to move on to talk about the modes of play then, because we've talked about downtime a little bit and sort of reflecting and talking about things. One of the things I sort of like about Subversion and another part that I worked on in the earlier stages, again, it's changed a lot since I put words into it, but there's sort of a gameplay cycle or loop where you got sort of three main modes or phases of any one story or episode, I guess you might call it.
Right.
The first of which is to act, which is where you do the things, interact, narrative role play, have your cinematics, roll dice and get things done. Try to do something positive for your community. Maybe the community elders tell you, hey, so and so's restaurant has been having trouble getting their tomatoes delivered, and they can't make the sandwiches that they're famous for. So can you look into that? Or this mysterious organization has moved in and is doing weird things in one of the warehouses, and we're hearing strange noises. Someone needs to check on that.
Right.
And then you go and do that thing. That's essentially sort of the main adventure phase, I guess. Then after that, there's specifically a phase or a mode of play that we call out as for reflect, where and that's where you'd sort of resolve have those interpersonal conversations and maybe get grit back, but also determine whether or not you lived up to your values, where you also, as a group, you reflect on the actions that you just took and sort of decide what was good and bad about that, or what sort of consequences might come forward, and the GM might interact with the party in different ways. That's I know a lot of role-playing games tend to kind of gloss over that phase. So we always have the thing at the end where you give out the experience points, right? But
yeah, we want to ask a little bit deeper questions during that time. So it's not just at the end of an adventure. It's after every session while things are fresh in your mind. Did you do anything that went against your values, right? Did you go do anything that went against your community values, right? That's what you're actually going for, right? So you will collect fortune or not at the end of each session, not just necessarily at the end of an adventure or whatever. Yeah. But the most important thing is that you reflect, right? Again, it's all just sort of building skills, right? Reflecting on what you've done is so important to real life, right? We want to reflect that in our games, right? Like, just think about it. Just think about what you did, and was that who you want to be? And sometimes the answer is absolutely. I crushed it and I'm proud of myself. Other times is you don't have to beat yourself up. You just have to say, like, hey, that wasn't necessarily who I wanted to be, and I think I'll work on that. Yeah.
And then also something we haven't really talked about as much is your characters and your community is going to have goals. And this is where you sort of look at, did any of those goals get achieved, or what sort of new goals might have arisen out of what we did, or what happened.
Yeah. So your community might just want to raise their caste, right? Maybe they're tired of being so poor and marginalized all the time, right? And maybe that's your overall goal. And if that's so, then great. You might have a goal of wanting to help as many people as you can, or change a particular thing about the government, or get this particular gang off your back. But again, those are just sort of ways. They're almost like hooks for your community, right? Ways that the GM can take the story, make things a little bit easier for them.
Yep. And then sort of the last step in the reflect mode is sort of doing bookkeeping for your factions, updating your factions and relations to see how the actions that occurred might affect those. So whether you benefited one of them or did something that messed up their agendas, sort of take a moment to go through and figure out where that stands.
Mm-hmm. Factions are a big part of Subversion as far as the community goes, right? So you have at least 5 factions that are going to be important to your community. They could be within their community, like, sub factions, or sort of factions that go head to head with others, or they could be outside, of your community, or both, right? Like, they sort of come in and out. But yeah, those are the people that are always sort of in your orbit. It's not going to be like in other games, and I don't mean to, like, I'm not downplaying any other games. I'm just saying it's not like corporations, right? Where, what the 10 big corporations are doing matters to you, or like how they feel about you. Like these are factions that you either create or pick from the book. There's going to be a huge list of factions that you can choose, but like these are going to be like really personal, right? Like these are going to be the people that you know. You're going to have an NPC like contact within each faction that you know, and how they feel about you really affects the life of your community. So yeah, that feels pretty important as well.
Yep. And then the sort of last mode of play that's in the gameplay cycle is downtime, which I like the idea of sort of a dedicated sort of step where you resolve sort of the things that you're doing in between the sort of intense adventures or actions. And that's where your character gets to essentially do things on their own, or interact with their community in different ways.
Yeah, I look forward to GMs and players taking this into a more role play style as well. I mean, like it's mechanical, right, in the same way that everything else in the game has mechanics for it. But I think it's more natural for us to sort of act out the stuff that we do in the act phase. But the groundwork is all there, right, for you to actually have a role-playing session of downtime stuff. So I look forward to hearing and seeing how people develop their sort of downtime sessions, because those are all relational things, right? Like they have a mechanic involved, like do this, but it's also, hey, visit this particular person and do this particular thing, right? So the role-playing there, the relationships and the role-playing there is absolutely important. So I'm looking forward to seeing how people's role playing expands if they're not antagonistic, right? There's nothing going on in downtime that is fighting or antagonistic. You are interacting with your community. It's like sort of inward facing. So I'm looking forward to how interacting with these people, all the time is going to affect the way people's stories develop, right? So if you're interacting with the same NPCs all the time, that means that these NPCs become important to your crew, so that the next time the GM says, okay, your community has suffered enough and now their impulse is being engaged. Well, like if your community impulse is everybody gets drunk and starts fighting in the streets, you're not going to want to just sit back while this particular doctor's office gets smashed because everybody's just so pissed and drunk, and so you're going to be like, hey, we've got to stop this, right? It just makes everything mean something more when you have relationships and when you have ties that bind you.
All right. Oh, I think before we move on to wrap things up, talk about the Kickstarter campaign and move into the Q&A section of the episode. Was there anything else you wanted to add that we haven't discussed? I know there's never enough time to go over all the details, but
yeah, there's a ton of stuff that we could talk about. But I think one of the things is paradigms, and paradigms are sort of kind of like classes, but more just sort of clusters of like skills that you can choose from, right? So we have things like artist or criminal or military, different mage colleges. Like, so they're all just sort of things that help you flesh out your character and make them unique. So you could have one character, you could have three characters who all decide, hey, I'm going to be really big in ranged combat, but they all take the same paradigm, the military paradigm, and they could all choose a bunch of different things. And so they could all choose the same skill, they could all choose the same paradigm, but they could all be super unique at the end of it, even though, they've chosen the same things, because the way paradigms are set up is it sort of gives you focuses, right? It makes your character unique by the different combination of skills that you use. So every single character in Subversion is going to feel absolutely unique to every other character. You are not just going to have a bard that is exactly the same, it has the best settings as every other bard. Like, that's not this game. Yeah.
And you can sort of pick and choose from any number of paradigms with your fortune as well. So you're not sort of locked into, I picked military, so I have to take the ones from there.
Right.
But you could take, sort of dip into military, dip into artist, and then there's paradigms for cyber tech.
Yep.
That's sort of where that's sort of resolved.
There's also community paradigms. There's relationship paradigms, right? So like this game is not just saying like become the best. It's saying flesh out a character, like like live this life, and it sort of does a cool job at that.
Yeah, and some of the paradigms are going to have some prerequisites. Other ones you just sort of pick by spending the fortune for them.
Yep. So you do get benefits if you decide like, hey, I'm going to invest a lot in this particular paradigm. You will still benefit from doing that. Yeah, absolutely.
Yeah. So I think again we've covered a lot of stuff. Again, there's a lot that we could talk about, like how hacking and breaching works. What the magic system is like. But I think for that, I will sort of turn your attention towards the Kickstarter campaign that is ongoing. And you can actually get a copy of the rulebook PDF and read that over and explore that for yourself.
Mm-hmm.
And also just search up Subversion to see what else is out there, because there's been a lot of different shows that have featured Subversion recently, where you talk about different stuff on there.
Yeah.
Are there any particular ones of those you'd like to point people towards?
Oh, shoot.
Put you on the spot there.
Yeah.
I didn't have that in the notes, so.
No, I don't think so. Nothing I can remember anyway.
Okay. Well, again, the Kickstarter campaign is live. It's still going on. We've got, let's see, how many more days? 18, I think?
Yes, it ends on the 23rd or 22nd. I can't remember off the top of my head.
So going strong, but could still be stronger. We'd love to see it hit that $100,000 goal for the top stretch goal.
That would be amazing. Yeah,
right.
We get the GM screen. I have plans for a GM screen. It might happen. Right. It just won't happen anytime soon if we don't hit that.
Yeah, it would be a super awesome GM screen. I'd love to see that happen. So
Palmer says if you want to see some cool stuff with Subversion, watch. Go to YouTube and search for Clockwork Tuba. They have done a community creation, a character creation, and they've done a couple of sessions of actual play. And that is fantastic stuff. They are great group. So yeah, check it out. You will get more than you need to decide whether or not you like Subversion if you watch Clockwork Tuba's group.
So talking about the different reward tiers in the Kickstarter, $25 gets your foot in the door with the core rulebook PDF.
Uh-huh.
$60 will get you the physical rule book. So there'll be shipping on top of that, I imagine.
Yep. The shipping will all happen in the post campaign, yeah. There's
also a retailer package where you can get multiple books for $90. With the idea that you're a retailer and you're going to sell them in your store.
Yep.
There's a sort of the main super cool backer level would be the hardcover rule book and Roll20 assets at $125.
Yep.
And above that are sort of the special tier ones, where if you want to throw bigger gobs of money at us, you get some extra special unique rewards. Like
please do.
Yeah, for $250, play with us. There's only one of these left at the time that I checked it, so at the time you're watching at a later date, that might already be gone. But this will get you a seat at the table with a number of other players who've backed at this level to play the game, which I believe you'll be running the game, aren't you?
I will probably be running this game, yes. The cool thing with that level, though, is if you play in one of these games, then you will actually get not that game will get novelized or turned into a fiction that will end up being turned into a novella. So your character will actually sort of be canonized, or the game will, with your characters in it, will be canonized. So that's sort of slick way to get into the canon, sort of on the sly. Yeah.
Yep. And then at $500, you get all the other rewards. And you get to add an original character to the game.
Yeah, so you would work with us. Yeah, go ahead.
There's only 2 of those left at the time I'm announcing. So
yeah, so you'd work with us to create a major NPC for the game. That could either be a pre-generated character, so like one of the major characters that makes it into the book is sort of somebody you can play right off the bat, or like a major head of a faction, or like a major enemy or something like that. You could sort of have your fun by making somebody important in the game.
You can add your own Harlequin into the story.
Yeah.
Or Dunkelzot or whatever. You can be the one to put that in the setting.
You could be the most powerful Lamasu in Neo Babylon or whatever.
So at the $1,000 level, you get a game run for you and your friends. So what's different from this is at the 250 level is you sort of get a seat at the table of a game that'll be run for you and other people. But at the $1,000 level, you get to put whoever you want in those seats around the table.
Yeah.
So it's for your game group. And I believe those game events are going to become canonized as well.
That's true. So if you and all your friends want to have you and your adventures become canonized in a novella, you absolutely can do that.
And then the highest tier reward option for $1,500, you get to add a faction of your design to the setting. So
yep.
So that's a pretty big deal.
It'll be there forever and ever after when somebody's designing their communities. Yours will be one of those sections to say hey, do you want to have this person come up again and again in your game? So these early factions are going to, I think, over time, be pretty important to the game. So if that's what you want to do, be important to the game, that's a way to do it.
All right, and since this game funded in the first 32 minutes and 34 seconds after launch, we're already in stretch goal territory. So far, 3 stretch goals have already been hit. One of them is to have extra sort of additional artwork. And then there's 2. The next 2 which have been hit each adds a new adventure PDF to the lineup.
Mm-hmm.
The next stretch goal, which we're getting close to at 50K, is a fiction anthology add-on. And is that going to be a new fiction anthology?
At 50, it will be a new fiction anthology. Yep.
Awesome.
We will create a new one, and you will be able to get it.
So it'll be the second fiction anthology of the setting.
Yep.
First one would be Neo Babylon Nights, which you can actually go and read now if you want.
Mm-hmm. It's good. It's really good.
And a 60K, we've got a Neo Babylon map, a map of the city, which will be awesome. And I really hope we get to see that developed.
Yeah, we have a map that's going to be made of Azor that you can grab as an add-on. But then, if we hit this number, then we'll make a second map, and that'll be the city of Neo Babylon.
Then at 75K would be the third adventure PDF. So there'll be 3 adventure PDFs that will launch with the RPG.
Mm-hmm.
And then 100K, which we're really hoping to hit, is the super awesome modular GM screen that will be very helpful for.
Yeah, what I hope to have on that one is to have the 5 different sections that can measure your faction reputation with each faction on the GM stuff, and then have the GM would be able to sort of do the faction game on their side, where it would have the different well, I don't want to get into it into the weeds, but there's certain ways that the GM can track what is happening with each of the factions and in real time. And if you get to a certain level, or if you allow, and basically every faction has their own story, and I think it'd be cool to be able to have the GM be able to track that. GM grit and all the I don't know. I have ideas.
Yeah, so once the Kickstarter campaign is over, since we're confident it's definitely funding, what's the release date?
The release date for Subversion, the print book?
Yes.
We are aiming for December of this year because most of the book is already done. We don't see that as being really difficult at all. It's been easier and easier the last couple of months to get things printed and shipped. So we are pretty confident in that. And the only thing that we're actually
not miniatures, right? So
no. We're much more confident in our ability to make a book than our ability to make miniatures. So the only things that are going to stop us is how much feedback we want to incorporate, right? And how long we want that feedback process to last, and the layout. And the layout might take a while, but Anna or Double Proficiency, who did Gangs of the Undercity and also did the Herbalist Primer, if anybody's familiar with that, huge hit on Kickstarter, is doing the layout for Subversion as well. So I have the utmost confidence in her. So I think we're good. I think we're pretty golden.
Awesome. And
also, we will be, just to say, if you want to play, we will be at Origins and Gen Con and ReaperCon this year. So if you wanted to get in and get a game, you can absolutely do that before the game hits, because we'll be running games at all 3 of those conventions.
Any plans for like a living campaign type thing down the road?
Yes. We might not. I mean, it's going to be hard to do that this year. But yes, in the future, we absolutely plan on having living campaign stuff.
It makes sense to get the game done first.
Yeah.
Like done and out there and in print.
If you can't buy the game, living campaigns don't make a lot of sense. That's what we're planning on doing.
And just one more question. I think you added this to the notes, but I'll toss it to you. So why are there so many cyberpunk fantasy games now? And how do you feel about that? It seems like all of a sudden it's a crowded market. This is one of at least 3 that I know of that have launched in February.
Yeah, so I was aware of Cities Without Number that launched, and it's a cyberpunk game, but it's also got rules for adding magic and spirits and stuff like that. Then you've got Vault, who are good friends of ours. Then you've got Sinless, and then you've got us, and then of course, like there's a couple other games that released, I think, the last year or 2, Tokyo Otherscape and Hardwired Island. Right, so like it just seems like there's a lot of cyberpunk-esque games or cyberpunk fantasy games in particular that are coming out. There was another one too that I can't quite remember, but yeah, I think it's having a moment, right? Like as sort of evidenced by that Forbes magazine, which said like the future of cyberpunk fantasy is now. And I think that there's a couple things going on, right? Like there's the prevalence of cyberpunk, the cyberpunk game launching and then maybe like not doing as well in some people's minds as it should have, but also just pushing cyberpunk into people's psyche at the same time that Dungeons & Dragons has been sort of on the rise, and then all of a sudden Dungeons & Dragons sort of drops the ball with all their OGL.
Put an arrow in its own foot.
Yeah, like stuff like that. But I think that now people are like, what's next, right? And if it's not D&D, and if it's not just cyberpunk, right? I think there's just a moment that's happening right now where people are saying like, hey, what if we mixed peanut butter and chocolate, right? And yes, Shadowrun has been doing that for a very long time. But there are multiple fantasy games, I'm not going to say multiple like just because there are like nearly infinite amounts of fantasy games, fantasy RPGs you can play, and there's a ton of cyberpunk games you can play, there's no reason that there can't be more cyberpunk fantasy games you can play, right? Like there's more room in a genre for just one game. So we're taking our shot, and we are not competing. That is, I say, Subversion is not competing with Shadowrun or Vault or Sinless or Hardwired or whatever. We're not competing at all because we are confident this game is not like those games at all. Like we're not trying to do the same thing at all. We're not mercenaries, right? We're not like gritty cyberpunk, like everything sucks, like live in this world and in murder for money. Like that is not at all the game that you'll be playing, right? So we're confident in that, but like some of the other games are trying to do that, right? They are trying to compete for the same space, and I wish them well. But like if you're trying to make a game where you are a cyberpunk fantasy mercenaries, working for money and doing crime, like good luck overthrowing Shadowrun. Like that's not going to happen. Like Shadowrun's got a pretty solid lock on the market, but.
Yeah, I'm much more excited about a game that's sort of doing its own thing and adding new ideas and such, rather than, say, just filing the serial numbers off of one that's already out there.
Right. Yeah. So, like, we're not even trying to do, like, Shadowrun in a different setting, right? Like, this isn't Dragonlance, right, for D&D, right? Like, we are doing a totally different game. Like, the feel and the vibe and the themes, like, the only thing it has in common with Shadowrun is the genre, right? So, but also the genre is cool as hell, or we wouldn't be here, right? Like cyberpunk and fantasy is a cool genre. So let's enjoy the fact that there's so much cyberpunk fantasy goodness coming out.
Yep, I'm excited about it. I'm excited to play some more Vault too. We had a lot of fun.
Vault was pretty cool. It had some cool innovations I really liked. Yeah.
So
just like you can play Earth Dawn and D&D and the One Ring and Dungeon World and whatever else at the same time. Like they're all fun fantasy games.
Demi-humans, I wish that
Demi-humans,
had
yes.
its time, but it never actually came out, did it?
I checked in. I think it's still coming out.
Oh, it is. Awesome. I thought it was sort of being tossed off the table when Robert.
If it's somebody
retired.
else got it, but they haven't done anything with it yet.
Oh, that's cool.
But if we'll swoop in. If not, we'll take it. We collect old RPGs here at Fragging Unicorns,
especially ones that Robert Bull designed.
Yes, for sure.
So let's move on to the Q&A section here. I think we had a couple questions in the chat. One of which Darren asked, "Can you be a nomadic community in Subversion?" And the answer to that is, yeah, definitely yes. I think one of the more default is a community that's sort of in a neighborhood or in a certain space, but you could definitely have a community that moves around. I think that's totally viable.
Yeah, and Clockwork Tuba's group decided to become a group of nomadic food trucks. So yeah, you absolutely can do that.
Let's see. I had a question on the Arcology Patreon Discord server. Igni asked, maybe a weird question, but is there any possibility that I could use the intro music from the Earth Dawn actual play? We're streaming a little Earth Dawn Shadowrun crossover campaign, and I would like to use the intro music for that. It's totally awesome music. It would be a nice surprise for anyone who knows about your Earth Dawn actual play. So, I think the answer to that is definitely yes. I guess it's a bit self-serving answering that question because I've got a SoundCloud page for my musician nom de plume, which is Prism Shard, and I have a bunch of music up there, and I always like to release my music under Creative Commons license so that anyone can take it and use it. Hopefully give me credit for it, but I'm not going to sue you if you don't. So I like the idea of doing that much more than say putting things behind a wall or restricting it. So yeah, my Earth Dawn it reminded me that my Earth Dawn actual play intro music, which I'm pretty proud of. I had a lot of fun with that. I was sort of going for an Eastern Europe kind of Balkan influence because that's actually where the primary setting of Earth Dawn Bar Save is sort of located on our planet. I think it ended up sounding a little bit more Middle Eastern than I originally intended, but I'm really happy with how it turned out. It's got sort of this electronic element as well as the sort of a mysterious sound. I also added a bunch of vocals in there, which are they're not like lyrical vocals. It's sort of I did many layers of myself doing some like weird noises and humming and stuff. It turned out really good. So yeah, I'm going to put that up on my SoundCloud, but Igni will also dig up that file and send it your way so you can use it. So, and definitely let us know when you're doing that stream, where that's going to be, and we'll do a shout out for that so people can find it. Let's see, taking a look at the chat here. I don't see any other questions though. So if you've got any questions, toss them in the chat here.
Errant Dragon says Subversion, the name, just makes me think it's trying to be too subversive for subversive's sake. And you know what? It is. Like it's just like that is 100% like what we're actually trying to do. And like, yes, we are trying to be subversive for subversion's sake. That's a good way to put it. That's
when you use the words like direct action, mutual aid, those don't come out of nowhere.
Yeah. Yep. We are leaning very, very hard into, like for example, like the other thing is like we have orcs and goblins and elves and that kind of stuff, but you will note that like when you read the descriptions of them, they are sort of the opposite, or maybe in some cases like not at all what you would expect from those particular lineages, right? Like so you have like elves who are particularly dour and tasteless. And you have orcs who are considered to be like the scientific nerds of, and it's not all they are, right? Like Cliff said, we're not trying to be bioessentialist with anything, but like we're trying to again subvert it with everything. We're trying to subvert it with the mechanics. We're trying to subvert it with, the gameplay. The people that we are as Fragging Unicorns try to be subversive, and in a gaming space that like where everybody seems to be out for themselves and like, taking whatever they can get and hurting people along the way. Fragging Unicorns is trying to be against that. So yes, Subversion is a little on the nose, not going to lie, but also it's on the nose. You know exactly what you're going to get on every single level when you play this game.
Not trying to be sneaky about it at all.
Yeah.
I think we've been going for a while now. I think we can wrap things up here. If any other questions are posted, we'll pick them up. Here we go. Palmer says, "How do you say 10 out of 10 awesome all the time?"
How do you stay?
How do you stay 10 out of 10 awesome all the time? So I guess some of those secrets are in Subversion. Talking to your friends about your feelings.
The only way that I am 10 out of 10 awesome is in the words of my friends. So I would say having friends who love you is the only way that you could be 10 out of 10 awesome, because my brain does not allow me to think in that category.
Yeah, focus on community and being a good and ethical person that talks to their friends about their feelings and stuff.
Yeah.
So yeah, it's all in there. Like Subversion, it's not just a role playing game. It's a recipe for being 10 out of 10 awesome all the time.
Yeah, play Subversion, and you too can be 10 out of 10 awesome all the time.
Thanks, Palmer. So we'll go ahead and wrap this up. I just want to mention before we go that our Arcology podcast has a Patreon. If you want to support the show, the $2 level gets you access to exclusive actual play series available as direct download or through private podcast feeds for your podcatcher. Already out there is the full and complete Lone Star campaign, a Pirates campaign, a Black Star Neo-Anarchist campaign, and then current, not complete yet, Las Vegas campaign, which is ghouls trying to survive in Las Vegas using Shadowrun Anarchy rules, game mastered by Carlton. In addition to that, at the $2 level, you get access to our patrons-only Discord server, where there's an Ask Mr. J channel where you can ask me stuff that I'll mention on the stream, but also just offline as well. And the next tier up at the $5 a month level, that lets you sit in on our actual play recording sessions when they happen, which that's a lot of fun. We enjoy interacting with the people who jump in while we record our sessions. You do maybe get some spoilers because things are recorded a long way out from the actual releases. But it's also just a lot of fun to be there when the magic happens, or perhaps a more apt analogy, see how the sausage gets made. So, again, I think we'll wrap things up there. Opti, thanks so much for joining me. It's always fun to be on a stream with you.
Yeah, I love it, and I love you.
I love you too. So that's it's really been a really great friendship. Started out as various Shadowrun podcasters who got in touch with each other, and it's led to a great friendship and lots of other cool things.
Indeed.
Which I suppose we'll mention. You have a podcast, the Neo-Anarchist podcast, that is also releasing new episodes on our YouTube channel here every other Saturday, opposite from the Arcology Live ones.
Mm-hmm.
And another podcast is Shadowrun Origins. Do you want to just do a quick blurb about that?
Shadowrun Origins is a Shadowrun actual play podcast that runs through the classic adventures from the golden age of Shadowrun. So like the first edition, second edition stuff about a team that starts off in the 2050s and includes Opti, the character from the Neo-Anarchist podcast and the Neo-Anarchist vidcast. And Cliff is on there as well, plays a character named T, and also Cliff is the default GM for that. But the cool thing about Shadowrun Origins is that we have rotating GMs. So we have people who have been either writing for Shadowrun or running Shadowrun and playing Shadowrun in that scene for a long time. And they take turns being GMs for the various adventures. And that has so far produced a really, really great team and great stories. And the team just feels like a family, and we really, really, really love it.
Yeah, me too. It's a lot of fun. I look forward to our next session.
Indeed.
All right, I think with that, we'll sign off. Thanks so much for everyone for joining us live and tuning in on the podcast feed or the videos posted on YouTube. And I think we'll call that a wrap. Bye, everybody.
Bye.